This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 440, entitled "What do feminists and masculists have in common?" Description. On the whole, masculists are rather antagonistic towards feminists. That is, fluffy feminist hypocrites who oppress men so badly, especially in the divorce courts, with their female solipsistic opposition to the menfairing of the gender laws, for example, legislating the para, etc. However, there are some points in which there is agreement and overlap of ideas between the masculists and the feminists. This flyer lists 5 and then comments on them. The flyer itself. What do feminists and masculists have in common? By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer changes tack a bit from the usual masculist flyers that I write, which are mostly antagonistic towards MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, attacking them for their callousness and gender criminality towards men, especially in the divorce courts, their female solipsistic opposition towards the legislation of the para, paternity rejection right, the general menfairing of the gender laws across the board, etc. This flyer asks what feminists and masculists actually have in common, since relations between these two gender political movements are not entirely opposed, although to a large extent they are. When one sits down and starts listing the ways that feminist and masculist ideas overlap, it becomes clear that there are quite a number of items on that list. This flyer talks about such a list and attempts to explain to feminists that it's actually in women's and feminists' self-interest to learn more about masculist ideas, so that these women can actually benefit themselves by having that greater masculist knowledge. I list some of those things in common between feminists and masculists and then comment on them. Bullet. Both movements are interested in gender politics. Bullet. Both push women to become FIPs, that's financially independent persons. Bullet. Both are fighting for gender justice. Bullet. Both benefit from becoming bi-conscious. Bullet. Both sexes will benefit from menfairing the gender laws. And now the commentary. Bullet. Both movements are interested in gender politics. Ask people to word associate with the term gender politics, and probably they will reply with the word feminism. Most people think of gender political issues as feminist issues, but as any masculist knows all too painfully well, that gender politics is not a one-way street, with women being the gender oppressed and men being the gender oppressors. Since masculists know all too well that not only do women oppress men, but oppress men far worse than vice versa, since women's oppression of men lasts decades in the form of man-slaving parasitism, living off the money and labour of a man for decades, committing a major gender crime against men that makes men's raping of women seem small beer in comparison. To anyone reading or watching my masculist flyers, it should be obvious that masculists are, by definition, heavily into gender politics, as are the feminists, but obviously with a focus on men, on men's issues, on how women oppress men, on those gender laws that need to be made to free men from the oppression of the traditional male role of being a man-slave to a fluffy parasite woman, etc. The very labels of these two liberation movements, that is, feminism and masculism, are the obvious female and male equivalent of each other. Both are out to change society, making it fairer to both sexes, lashing out at how one sex oppresses the other. Feminists lash out at men from blocking women from achieving their full human potential, particularly in the workforce and in women's careers. And masculists lash out at women for manslaving them, trapping them into decades of labour in exchange for a bit of sex from women. That tends to dry up over time. Both movements are liberation movements. Feminists want women to be given the same rights and opportunities that men have, particularly in their careers and performance levels. Masculists want women to stop parasiting off them and stand on their own two financial feet by fipping up, by bothering to get a career-competent education so that they can be fips as adults with half a century of career window. Bullet. Both push women to become fips, that's financially independent persons. The feminists have been pushing the desirability of female careerism for many decades, in fact for well over a century. The feminists tell women that by fipping up, she will give herself a much higher degree of autonomy than if she is a fluffy parasite living off the money of a man, and hence subject to what he wants her to do and be, since he is the one who pays the bills and feeds her, hence feels the right to control her. He has the financial power over her. By fipping up, a woman can give the finger to such male control, since she has her own money and can do what she likes with her life. If the marriage, the relationship, goes sour, she can get rid of it. She can get out of it much more easily because she can support herself financially and not have to stay in an intolerable marriage because she cannot buy food to feed herself. Fluffies, that is, traditional women who expect to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man, can afford to ignore the advice of feminists because she thinks that she has sexual control over her husband. If he does not give her enough money, then she simply reduces the amount of sex she gives to him, behaving as a prostitute, supplying sex for money. That is, the money earned by her manslave husband, who works for her for decades in exchange for a bit of sex from time to time. Fluffies, however, cannot afford to ignore the advice, in fact the demands, of the masculists that she must fip up or be severely punished by the masculists by forcing her to live a manless life, and hence loveless, sexless, babyless, and as masculinist ideas spread throughout the world, she will be spat at by both sexes, especially the masculists, who see her as immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin to be severely punished by being forced to rot on the shelf, manless, so that her fluffy parasite genes are removed from the gene pool, effectively exterminating her slowly. A fluffy can only be a fluffy if she can get her financial claws into some stupid, ignorant, gullible, manslavable man who has not yet had his masculinist consciousness raised, who is unaware of how powerfully women, that is fluffy, non-fip women, oppress men by manslaving them for decades, making them work for women for decades, thus committing a major crime against men by living off the money and labour of another human being, the ultimate in parasitism. Masculists aim to wipe out fluffies by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, so that fluffies are forced to make a choice between starving to death or converting themselves into becoming fips who can earn their own money and stand on their own two financial feet and not manslave a man. Thus the masculist push for the fipping of women coincides pretty closely with the feminist push for financial independence for women, with the exception that the masculist push is far stronger on fluffies than the feminist push. The masculist push for the fipping of women terrifies fluffies. They can ignore the feminists, but not the masculists, since they rely on manslaves to work for them. But as masculist and MGTOW ideas spread across the planet, the supply of such gullible, manslavable men is drying up. especially as young men around the world learn of the toxicity of the divorce courts, taken over by the hated fluffy feminist hypocrites who want equal rights with men in the parliaments but reject equal obligations with men in bothering to get a career-competent education so that women can share the burden of earning the living equally with men. Fluffy feminists are even more hated by masculists than fluffies. It's bad enough that fluffy feminists are fluffies and hence manslavers and hence hated by the masculists. But they are also hypocrites, expecting to be given equal rights with men by the parliaments, but expect to behave as fluffy parasites in the divorce courts, thus financially massacring and destroying the lives of one father in four. In capital letters, one father in four, followed by 15 exclamation marks. As masculinist ideas spread, no man will be prepared to be a manslave to a fluffy, thus wiping out fluffydom. To masculists, fluffydom is manslavery. Manslavery is slavery, which is hated. Look at the root cause of the US Civil War. Masculists aim to liberate men from manslavery by forcing women to fip up or be punished by being manless. In light of the above, you could say that feminism supplies the carrot in the fipping of women, and masculism supplies the stick in the fipping of women. And in this case, the stick is far more powerful than the carrot, since a fluffy cannot survive if no man is prepared to be a manslave to her, thanks to the universalization of masculist ideas, when every man on the planet has had his masculist consciousness raised so that he spits on fluffies and ignores them to death, literally. Bullet. Both are fighting for gender justice. If you ask the average feminist, what is feminism all about? Most would say that it's a fight for gender justice, giving women equal rights with men so that there's no discrimination on the basis of sex. Women have been fighting for such gender justice for over a century and feel that they still have not achieved full gender justice. For example, in not yet having equal power with men in, for example, the boardrooms of companies, in the number of politicians or national leaders, etc. Masculists are fighting for something similar, namely to push women to get off their fat parasitic asses and fip up, so that fluffies are exterminated slowly, so that men no longer have to pay the traditional price of being a manslave to a fluffy wife in order to get a bit of sex from her. Masculists are outraged that women have the MARA, that's maternity rejection right. But no country in the world has yet legislated the PARA, paternity rejection right, which would give a man who rejects an unwanted pregnancy the right to fill in a government paternity rejection form, so that if the woman goes ahead with the pregnancy, then she takes full financial responsibility for the costs of the kid. The fact that women have the right to reject an unwanted pregnancy and men don't screams out for reform, given its blatant and massive gender injustice against men, manslaving men for decades due to an unwanted fatherhood. The existence of the MARA and the non-existence of the PARA outrages masculists, who claim that it is the greatest form of gender injustice that exists, and it's not against women but against men. This is the end of part 1.